Hello, this time on Sitrep.
For the first time in human conflict history, drones are now killing far more and causing far more casualties than heavy artillery.
But is the UK falling behind in the race for drone supremacy? We'll examine the numbers and hear from 3 Scots troops on exercise in Latvia, getting hands-on with one of the newest surveillance drones. We'll also hear from the new Defence People and Veterans Minister on how she plans to tackle accommodation and recruitment problems from her own experience of service. And a new modern history of the British Army over the last half century, its rise and fall, and what the author thinks we should learn.
When you've got this high level of exercising, you're constantly exercising the muscles and you're learning lessons. I mean, this is why rugby teams train so much.
Defence Explained.
When I set off the drone, it'll be completely autonomous and automated via the laptop itself.
Times are changing, things are changing. You see it a lot as well in different places. Keeping us modernised helps us do our job better.
This is Sitrep with Kate Gerbeau and Professor Michael Clarke.
So there are a couple of reasons we wanted to take stock of how the UK is faring in the drone revolution we're seeing unfolding. Partly it's because our colleague David Sibbles-McCann has been with troops on an exercise specifically to roll out new tech, but also because the opposition keeps asking questions about how many drones the government has bought for our forces over the last year and isn't happy that it's not getting numbers back. Micah, we've seen just how much drone warfare has evolved in Ukraine. Everyone is betting big on drones right now. Are we sure they're here to stay and not just specific to this conflict?
Oh, I think we're sure that they're here to stay as a new part of the robotics revolution in military affairs. That's fairly clear. But you're absolutely right. We shouldn't assume that what we see in Ukraine is what we'll see in the future of all warfare, because the drones in Ukraine are very specific to that conflict. It's partly dominated by the sort of terrain of that particular country, where the areas that are being fought over, which are very appropriate for drone use, and the fact that drones are a substitute for artillery in many ways in a conflict that's become otherwise somewhat static as far as the front lines are concerned. So, yeah, we shouldn't assume that what we see in Ukraine is what we would do, but we should assume that what we call the drone zone, up to 5,000 feet above the ground, is now the area of drone warfare, drone on drone, counter drone on drone, and so on. Aircraft are still very important, but the 5,000 feet limit is a new drone zone of warfare, which we wouldn't have anticipated, not like this anyway, about a decade ago.
Well, let's just take a step back for a moment. You and I, Mike, would have first spoken on Sitrep 15 years ago. Back then, military drones were mostly big beasts. They were a high-end attack and surveillance capability, really only available to the most powerful militaries. We were using them in Afghanistan. So is it fair to say the UK was up with the lead pack at the start of the military drone race?
Not really. I think we adopted the RQ drones, the American drones, which Predator, and we kept them as Watchkeeper and so on. And they were really, drones were just small aircraft doing the same job that aircraft would do, but more persistently and without a pilot. And I think we regarded them as useful, but not really so revolutionary or so changing the battlefield. And what made the difference was the short war between Azerbaijan and Armenia in 2020, when suddenly a whole group of cheap drones, they're Bayraktar drones, the Turkish ones, with these Harep Israeli drones for surveillance, and the Azeris used them just in high numbers, cheap drones in high numbers, and they really, as it were, set about Soviet-era T-72 tanks that the Armenians had and beat them, reduced them. And that really made people sit up. And so then, I think then, British thinking about drones began to evolve quite quickly, but not until then.
I guess, Mike, following on from that, seemingly what's changed things so much in Ukraine is much smaller and potentially cheaper first-person view drones, FPVs. The government is refusing to answer those questions about how many drones it has ordered in the last year. Ministers cite operational security, of course. But then the then Procurement Minister, Maria Eagle, said in June that the Army had taken delivery of 450 FPV drones and another 3,000 were due to be delivered by August. To give some context to that number. We've bought 50,000 drones for Ukraine, and Ukraine itself is reportedly expected to produce 4.5 million this year. Ukraine is at war, Mike, and we are not, but those numbers sound stark when we're supposed to be getting our forces war ready.
Yes, and the Ukrainians are saying, at least Zelensky has said, that they think they might try to produce 10 million drones next year, which they can. Or at least if they've got the money, they've got the facilities to do it, they've got the people to do it, if they have enough money to pump into the whole system, 10 million drones. So in a future war scenario, we're looking not at a few thousand, but we're looking at the proportions of a million. Have you got 1/3 drones, 500,000 drones? We're looking at drones in the same sort of numbers that we look at artillery shells, because these FPV drones, the first-person view drones, in a sense is like an artillery shell. It's like a very intelligent artillery shell. If it carries one charge of a grenade size, for instance, and it can actually chase a soldier into a dugout, which it can, then it's like a very clever artillery shell. And the other FPV drones, of course, are merely for surveillance. They can be used in swarms so that they're impossible to shoot down. If you have a swarm of 1,000, you can shoot down 900 of them, but the headquarters will still get back the picture from the 100 that can't be shot down. So when we talk about drones in the future of open warfare, then we will be talking about drones in the same sort of quantities that we've traditionally used to talk about artillery shells.
So the government's position is that it plans to spend £4 billion on drones and autonomy over this parliament. It says it started to roll out 3,000 strike drones, 1,000 surveillance drones will follow, and the army will train thousands of operators. I mean, given the figures that you were just citing, is that enough at this point?
Well, it's enough to get going, but we'll need to go a lot further and a lot faster. Again, it comes back to the whole timetable for the defence review. I mean, we know this is a defence review from 2025 to 2035. It's a 10-year review. And we all know, and I think people have been pretty explicit about this, that we won't see any real benefits or real change until at least 2027. So this next couple of years are the most difficult years. And after 2027, through 28, 29, 30, we should start to see some change. So what the government is doing, it's doing the right things. And interestingly, of the money it's putting in this 4 billion onto drones and autonomy. The autonomy is the key word there. The ability to use AI to give drones the autonomy to operate in swarms in very high numbers. So the government's doing the right things. The question we all ask ourselves is will we be where we think we need to be in 2027, 28? And some people are sceptical about that, and some say, well, no, we are due to be there. We will see. But the journey only really begins, the journey for quantity only really begins in 2028. Is that soon enough? No, probably not. But will it be soon enough to give us the deterrent to a European war? Well, maybe, but only maybe.
We talked about it with things like artillery shells many times, production capacity, this key factor, given the government says about 70% of its drone spending this year will be with UK companies. How is that production capacity actually looking?
In principle, not bad. And the government's just put in 400 million into the TechEver factory, which is being constructed and expanded in Swindon. And TechEver are a typical smaller company, and they can do everything. They'll do research, they'll do testing, they'll production, they'll do everything to, as it were, put in raw materials at one end and drones come out the other end. Interestingly, the factory in Swindon is one of the areas where they used to make Spitfires in the Second World War. It's one of the old Spitfire production sites, and TechEver have taken it over and have got a big push from the Ministry of Defence. So they're producing their AR3 drones at the moment, and they'll start producing this much more capable AR5 drone there, which should be pretty effective. And then there's Project Octopus, which is the code name for the drone wall in Europe. And Britain will be part of that with cooperation from Ukraine, which of course is very important that we partner with Ukraine, both for their benefit and for ours. And then there's companies like, I was looking at Wind Racers, and Wind Racers are in Fareham, in Hants. And Wind Racers, they produce heavier drones. They've got this thing called the Ultra drone, which is capable of taking supplies back and forwards. It's actually a heavy lifting drone, but it can be adapted, and it can be used in civilian capacities as well as military. And they too have got some good things to offer. So there's a number of firms who've been in this lower level of the aerospace sector who are available if they get the investment to really scale up in the next 2 or 3 years. So I'm reasonably hopeful about that. But of course, it depends on, is the money there? Is it committed quickly enough, and can they do what they say they can do?
So potentially quite a lot could be going on. On the bigger end of the scale, though, Russia is now reported to be producing its own Shahed suicide drones in their thousands every month. Is there any sign that the UK is also investing in an equivalent capability, and do we need to?
Not that I'm aware of, not those sort of drones. I mean, the Russians have got their Shahed production line. The Shahed was the Iranian drone, of course, and they produce their own version, the Duran 1 and now the Duran 3 in particular, which, flies higher, faster, and can carry a bigger payload. And they've got this enormous factory at Alabuga in Tatarstan, and they're producing, tens of thousands of these things. I don't think we're ever going to do that, and we probably won't need them, because we don't plan to bombard somebody's homeland with 500 of these things every night in the way that the Russians are bombarding the Ukrainian homeland. I mean, we're producing drones, as it were, for the battlefield, not for strategic bombing, as I understand it anyway. We do, I mean, BAE are producing the Tyrannus drone, the Nordic god of war, or God of Thunder, isn't it, Tyrannus? And that is a pretty big thing, but I don't think we'll ever want to produce those sorts of big drones, big bomb-carrying drones, suicide drones, to be used in the sort of numbers that the Russians are using them in. So I don't see the likelihood of that, and probably not the requirement.
So if we bring all of this together, what is your assessment then of how we are doing in the global drone race, particularly compared to our potential enemies?
We're doing the right things, but at a pace that is as fast as we can now go within the money that we've got allocated, which is to say, not enough. But we know it's not enough, and it will ramp up, and it should improve. It should improve. But we should have started this back in certainly 2019, 2020, when the writing was on the wall in 2020. And a lot of people saw it, and the MOD saw it, and Conservative ministers saw it. But seeing it and then doing something about it are two different things.
So it's okay, could do better.
Could do better, indeed.
Let's go from the big strategic picture right down to the hands-on level. New drones are starting to roll out, among them the Ghost Mark IV, a miniature surveillance helicopter. BFBS Forces News reported David Civils McCann is just back from an exercise not too far from Russia's doorstep, where 3 Scots were getting hands-on with Ghost and some other new kit.
Well, we're in a training area in the west of Latvia, fairly close to the border with Lithuania, about a 2-hour drive from the capital, Riga. So about 200 members of the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Scotland have deployed to the country for the exercise Forest Guardian, which is part of this 10-nation mission Terrassus, which stretches all the way from the Arctic to the Baltic states. It's a joint expeditionary force exercise, and this part of the mission was to focus on JEF's capability to defend Latvia territory from any aggression. So getting these allies to sort of work together, getting everybody used to operating in the terrain. So 3 Scots were training alongside the hosts as well as the Italians and the Canadian Army. They lead the NATO enhanced forward presence in Latvia, the equivalent to what the UK does in Estonia to the north. So it was about ensuring they can all work together successfully and deter any aggression in the region, but also test out some of the new battlefield technology in the field to enhance their effectiveness. So things like drones, uncrewed platforms, artificial intelligence to enhance their lethality in this part of the drive to modernise the army.
And one piece of the kit that they got their hands on was this Ghost drone. Tell me more.
Yeah, one of the officers, probably showing both our ages, compared it to the 80s TV show Airwolf, and it does kind of remind you of it, this sort of black mini helicopter about 2 metres, and when you see it flying, it can be quite deceiving. At a glance, when it's in the sky, it can look like a full-scale aircraft. It's used mainly for reconnaissance to sort of detect and track any adversaries in the battle space, up to a range of about 12 kilometres. But one of the really interesting things I think it does is it can use AI to alter how noisy it can be when it's near a target and adapt how noisy it is to make sure it's not detected. So it can be a really useful bit of kit, especially when you're exercising somewhere like the forests of Latvia. It's operated via a laptop with a lot of the software actually quite a closely guarded secret. In fact, if you watch our video from the exercise, you'll see we've actually had to blur it out for security purposes. But Private Nicholas Reid was operating it, and he talked us through the process.
The way this drone works is I'll implement a waypoint mission by selecting the waypoints, and this is what best suited for the current objective. And what will this do is it's within my flight zone. It'll fly to the area I've wanted it to go to. Once there, I will control the gimbal mount, which is this camera here, and I'll control it to watch the objective point. I can also set the altitude and the speed it's going to set to. So when I set off the drone, it'll be completely autonomous and automated via the laptop itself.
Now, this is kit we've seen before on exercise. And in fact, the Royal Marines have recently used it in California when they were exercising alongside the US Marine Corps in the mountains. A sort of multi-million-pound contract for them has been agreed with the developer and the MOD, and it's been used across the forces to enhance this drive to autonomous platforms, a new technology that was outlined in the Security Defence Review a few months ago.
And they're also getting to grips with drone technology, uncrewed vehicles on the ground, Dave.
Yeah, it's part of this sort of new kind of arms race, using this new technology to get that battlefield edge, especially in an environment where we are in, where the advantage could be vital, very challenging environment. Low visibility, a lot of obstacles, using things like Parrot reconnaissance drones to spot enemy positions. Not anything brand new, but incorporating this existing capability into traditional infantry skills and this new kits. Uncrewed platforms like the Viking unmanned ground vehicle, which is quite an adaptable piece of kit that could be a real labour-saving asset in the battle space, and something that could fulfil a number of roles, as Jacob Cully from the developer IDV Robotics told me.
It's a multi-role vehicle, uncrewed. In this configuration, we've got the cage for storage, but we could also run casualty evacuation, so with stretchers on each side. We've also run CBRN payloads, so chemical sniffing, as well as iStar. So we've had a large camera head on a mast, on a boom mast, as well as weapon stations. The vehicle's fitted with standard payload connectors, so payload can be loaded on. The vehicle automatically detects what system is fitted.
The platform is still very much in the trial phase in how it could be used in an environment like this with the infantry, but looking at something like, for example, Jacob mentioned a casualty evacuation, it could be a real labour saver. We watched one during the raid, and extracting the casualties quite labour intensive, takes quite a few troops, and by the looks of things, it looked like the soldiers would have welcomed the Viking coming along and taking the casualty back if it had arrived.
I bet they would. And crucially then, Dave, what do the soldiers of Three Scots make of this new tech?
Well, the soldiers I spoke to were pretty enthusiastic about the stuff they were testing out. They saw the benefit of it. This exercise, this is what it was about. It was about testing it out, I guess, in the heat of battle, seeing what works, seeing what needs worked on. But I think it's something they realised that it's going to make this really tough job of being an infantry soldier that little bit easier, and a lot of it is potentially life-saving. It's also worth remembering that a lot of the soldiers, especially the ones I talked to that were out using it in the field, are quite a bit younger than certainly I am, and are from a generation where using technology in everyday life is second nature, and although it's new to them, I think they're already beginning to see the benefit of it, and a few of them told me just how useful they were finding it.
For the drones, it makes viewing the enemy a lot easier, and the unmanned drones for logistics and CASEVACs makes it a lot more easier.
Times are changing, things are changing. You see it a lot as well in different places, that how they're working with it and using it, and it just helps a lot more and makes you win battles quicker. And it's spot on, some of the kit that they've been giving out.
We've been playing about with ATACs. It's just like a wee tablet you get on your chest. You can do so much on it. It's so much better than having to do everything on paper, and it's a lot better for like the encryption and everything. So it's keeping us modernised, helps us do our job better.
Now, you just heard at the end there Private Aidan Hardy talking about this ATAC tablet. These are small devices that are attached to the chest that can allow the soldiers to share a real-time map on location and a view of the terrain during a mission. It's fed by GPS and drone feeds to give that up-to-date view of the battlefield. So it guess it's an upgrade in the old sort of paper maps and pens that were especially difficult to use in the bad weather. But it's about helping them in their missions and react to that changing picture on the battlefield. Especially useful when operating in an environment like the one we were exercising in Latvia.
And Dave, you've been on plenty of military exercises in the UK and across Europe over the years. I'm just wondering if you get a sense of whether this kit is making the difference now already, or if it's still a way to go before it can build up into a capability on the battlefield.
I think with any changes to infantry warfare, it's all going to take a little bit of time to get fully integrated. I mean, fully integrated in the way of working and be effective. But this is what exercises like these are for. Like I said, the soldiers we spoke to were very positive about the kit, and they could see why it would make a difference. The Army overall is looking to modernise, as it has done in the past. This is just this new era that troops are having to adapt to. We're already seeing impact new tech is having in Ukraine. Luckily for these soldiers, they're able to get to grips with it in a much different environment. But all this new tech is something that is part of the future. It's going to feature largely going forward, and it is becoming more and more advanced all the time. I think keeping ahead of the game in this area of warfighting is something that everyone realises is pretty vital.
Really good to hear about that trip. Thanks very much for that, Dave.
No problem.
And Mike, that really does remind us, doesn't it, that capability is not just having the kit. People need to be able to use it to maximum effect, and that also takes time.
Yeah, and Kate, it points up the enormous difference between a well-trained professional army and an adequately trained conscript army, or even a professional army that's only adequately trained rather than well-trained. Because, all the boys and girls will play about with these things when they're given them on exercise. They're good fun, they have a look and they'll say this and they'll say that and they'll use them. The key question is, what technologies do they turn to under pressure? When things are going wrong, when they're in difficult conditions, when there's not enough time, when people are already being injured around them, what do they turn to? What do they use that they rely on? Something that's too fiddly, they'll just forget it. There isn't time. They'll go back to something else. And so that's where the really well-trained professional armies who don't find this stuff too fiddly under pressure, then they can use it. But of course, the boys and girls on the front line will soon tell you what works and what doesn't. And I always had this thing, in my business as a defence analyst, above the level of colonel or lieutenant colonel, I'm part of the conversation about strategy and thinking and training and so on. Below the level, at the level of major and downwards, I just believe what they tell me. I can't tell them what's better and what isn't, of course. I can put things into context, but ultimately, they know what they're talking about. And they can only do that through practice and use. So it's really important that things like Three Scots, try out this stuff and, if possible, absorb as much experience as they can of using it under pressure, because that's what counts.
Of course, and hearing about the ATAX tablet they're using, replacing things like proper maps, does it ever worry you that all this technology is great, but if it stops working, you're stuffed, not to put a fine point on it?
Yeah, that's right. You've got to be able to go back to maps. And that's the whole point. Battle is about the creation of chaos. It's the deliberate creation of chaos in an area. I remember a very eminent general told me that. He said, no, you're creating chaos. And the idea is that your side can cope with the chaos better than the other side. That's what moving to contact really means. And if you're going to cope with the chaos, then you've got to have lots of different systems that you can rely on to do the same job if necessary. And if your electronic systems go down and if your iPads go down, you go back to maps. You've got to be able to use them.
On that theme, in the whirlwind of the government reshuffle a few weeks ago, there was a subtle but significant change inside the MOD, with Royal Marines veteran Al Khan's moved to become Armed Forces Minister. Louise Sandher-Jones, a former Army intelligence officer elected last year, is now the Defence Minister for Veterans and People. It means she's charged with, among other things, recruitment and support for families. So, how does she plan to improve things? The Minister has been talking to BFBS Forces News reporter Will Hollis on a visit to troops and families at Decalia in Cyprus.
For me, obviously I serve myself as a veteran, and so for me it's getting reacquainted with some of the current issues that are in the military, particularly those that are within my portfolio, and that's why it's been really great to get out here to Cyprus so early and come and see what the troops are doing out here.
What's it been like visiting Cyprus, and what are you hoping to learn and achieve by being here?
So I wanted to come out here really early because obviously the British forces here play a really vital role in supporting regional stability, and they've also got a good working relationship with the Republic of Cyprus as well. I know they've been doing joint exercises together, and they have also been working very closely on fighting wildfires as well this summer. They've been working really hard. There's so many fantastic operational activity that's going on here, and I just wanted to get out and see how they're all doing delivering it.
You've spoken to a lot of families and serving personnel. What have they been telling you about the overseas experience for the armed forces?
Yeah, so I've spoken to people who've been out here for a few different lengths of time. I think what they've all got in common is they do see this as a great opportunity to come out somewhere different, take advantage of some different challenges. And there's also some of the flip side of coming out here as well. Not everything's going to be the same as it was in the UK. So there's a couple of conversations that we've been having about support to wider families, for instance, and things like that.
One of the things that's been happening here is the long-term relationships, access to service, family housing. What's the state of that pilot, and is it going well? Is it successful?
So I think this is a really fantastic initiative. We know that people have all different types of relationships now. You know, marriage is not for everybody. And I think it's really important we recognise that when people are in a long-term relationship, that they're able to have that same support as a married couple. From what I've been speaking to people, they really appreciated the pilot. So we'll get the results in due course, but I really hope it's something we can carry on supporting.
You think it's something that will carry on in the future and go beyond a pilot scheme?
Yeah, subject to the lessons learned from the pilot, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about recruitment, because the most recent figures from the Ministry of Defence is that more people are leaving the armed forces than joining. Recruitment and retention is part of your portfolio. What do you hope to do here, and what does the Labour government hope to do here?
So recruitment and retention has been a real challenge for so many years. It was a real issue even when I was in, and so we've inherited that crisis. Like with many things that have been occurring over many years, it's going to take a little bit of a while to turn it around. I'm really pleased when I look at some of the impact of what we are doing. So RAF and Navy in particular, recruitment's going a lot better. Still some work to do with the Army, and again I think we need to make sure that we're understanding what we can do to improve recruitment and retention. It's about making sure that people, when they want to stay, that they feel supported, that they can.
Is it a problem that more people are leaving than joining?
So I think it's a challenge for us that we need to overcome. We obviously need to have a military that's at its proper strength, being able to do everything that's asked of it. We ask a lot of our armed forces personnel, and we need to make sure that we've got the right people with the right training who are being supported to do their job.
You've been in Decalia today looking at a lot of housing and meeting people. You will be going to RAF Factory, where there are a number of big military-based projects, including a new terminal and a new runway.
Yeah.
It is the busiest airbase outside of the UK.
Yeah.
Why is it important to improve those facilities?
Hey, I've been a customer of RAF Factory myself when I came back from tour. I know how important it is and how busy it can be. I think it's really great that we are making sure that we are investing in that facility, whether it's the runway or the passenger handling facility. There's a wider programme of investment across the island, whether it's building new accommodation or building the new school that we've got here recently. We just need to make sure that we're upgrading the infrastructure as and when we need to.
You've spoken to veterans. You are a veteran yourself. What is important about the offering for veterans, not just here in Cyprus, where people seem to be quite happy, but the offer across the UK and the wider services? Yeah,
it was fantastic to meet veterans earlier and hear about all the amazing opportunities that they've taken advantage of in Cyprus, and just have that discussion. Back in the UK, I think my absolute priority is rolling out Valor, so that's getting those regional centres. We've got £50 million of funding behind that, and that'll be able to provide support to veterans in the UK. And that's why I really want to speak to veterans out in Cyprus to hear kind of the support that we're able to give them. Sounds like they're all having a great time out here in Cyprus though.
You've seen pretty much everything about British Forces Cyprus. Is Cyprus still important to the UK Armed Forces and the UK government?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. That's why I wanted to come out here so early. The range of operational activity that Cyprus is supporting is just immense. It's so important to us that we have this, that we have the units that are here, that we're supporting them to be able to do their job properly, that we're understanding the breadth of what is occurring out here, and then just from my portfolio as well, understanding the unique challenges that we have for service personnel and their families when they come out here, and make sure that they have the best experience that we can give them.
And you've been a member of Parliament for more than a year now. How does it compare to your regimented forces life?
So in some ways it can be quite similar. Some things that are quite similar, I think, is just the challenge is that when you're an MP, it's a huge honour and a huge privilege, much how I felt when I got my commission. And it really did, when I got elected, it honestly felt like commissioning from Sandhurst. And it's a huge honour and a privilege for me to command intelligence corps soldiers, and it's a huge honour and privilege for me now as an MP to serve my constituents, to be given their trust to serve them to the best of my ability. I still use the Sandhurst motto, serve to lead. I think it really applies for MPs as well. And now as a minister to again be responsible for the welfare of people across the armed forces, again, it's just a massive honour for me.
That was Defence, Veterans and People Minister Louise Sandher-Jones talking to Will Hollis. And Mike, her appointment means we once again have two ministers in defence who have hands-on experience of serving their country, but neither in the top job.
No, John Healey in the top job in a sense, it doesn't matter whether he's got, military experience or not, in a sense, because he's in the very top political job. So he has to deal with the Treasury and with Number 10. He has to be, as it were, overtly political, as well as, running and overseeing a very big organisation. So you want somebody with sort of CEO elements, as well as that political nous to be able to guide the MOD. But lower down, Al Khan's was very good news, I think, and he's now Armed Forces Minister. I think Louise Sandher-Jones is good news. I loved the fact that she used the Sandhurst motto, serve to lead. That's a motto for life, for a good life, serve to lead. And I think she will be good news. And again, the frontline service personnel, they very quickly work out with the political people who are part of the MOD team. Those who do the job and are primarily concentrate on do the job, as opposed to those who do the job but have got more of their attention on their political careers. When people say, oh, the minister was such and such, he or she was very political, what they mean by that is that they had more of an eye on their career than on the job. And they very quickly work out which is which. And to be honest, the MOD over the years has had rather too many ministers who had an eye on their political career rather than the job. And I would like to think, and I do think actually, that that's not the case this time. I think there's a concentration now from top to bottom in the ministerial team on getting the job done, and my goodness, it's quite a job.
Needs to be done, yeah. Let's hope that all works out then. Finally this week, a new history of the British Army. Yes, many have been written before, but this one takes in its most recent 50 years, a time in which it shrunk by more than half. The rise and fall of the British Army tells stories not just of the major operations, but also significant exercises and even operations planned and rehearsed, but never carried out. The aim to chronicle constant change along with what went right and wrong to help learn lessons. Its author is retired Brigadier Ben Barry from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and he has hands-on experience of significant parts of the history he's recording.
I served for 35 years, which is 70% of the book. Well, I did my turn in Northern Ireland. I did my turn in Bosnia. I was lucky enough also to take part in the final wave of big formation Cold War exercises, including Exercise Lionheart 84, the largest exercise of that period, where a whole corps was deployed into the field, over 130,000 troops. It included 12,000 NATO troops, 12,000 members of the Royal Air Force, but 3 whole British divisions, the lines of communication activated. The exercise box ran from Ostend all the way to 10 miles from the inner German border. And it was not only exciting, but real efforts have been made to make it unpredictable and allow free play. For example, the brigade I was in, the headquarters was destroyed by a raiding party of paratroops. So one of the battalions had to step up. Similarly, at one stage in the exercise, 4th Armoured Brigade was destroyed because the enemy unexpectedly counterattacked it. And there was a lot of friction and a lot of challenge, which I saw for myself. And I think one of the weaknesses that the resource crunch after the end of the war in Afghanistan imposed on the army is it hasn't exercised at that level since. It's only just restored doing proper brigade exercises, for example.
And you set out to identify failures and successes for the army in those 50 years. If we start with the positive, what are some of the successes?
I think operationally, Bosnia was a great success. It's very easy to forget just how challenging Bosnia was. And in mid-1995, for example, it was in a state of almost permanent crisis. It wasn't clear how the mission would proceed, whether it might have to withdraw under fire. Battalions and regiments had very, very difficult times. You then get Kosovo, which becomes very difficult because of while the force is waiting to go in because of the difficulties of the NATO air campaign. I think the final place where you've got an equal level of difficulty is Sierra Leone, but it comes off brilliantly. And then Britain plays a really important role in building the Sierra Leone army over the following decade. And we see the value of this actually in 2014, when there's the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, and an army-led joint task force, including civilians from the NHS, is deployed to Sierra Leone. Now, the expert epidemiologists back in the UK are saying, it's lost. You can't turn this disease around. The outbreak's under control. But the joint task force, led by the army and with a lot of army in it, manages to do so in part because it mobilises the Sierra Leone army, who perform brilliantly because of the way their capabilities been built.
And what about the failures during those 50 years? History records Iraq and Afghanistan as failures for the UK and the US, but is it fair to describe them as failures for the army? Because arguably they did successfully what they were asked to do. It was the people who were doing the asking that failed to get it right.
Well, the mitigating circumstance is that whilst Tony Blair did exactly what was required of a prime minister in terms of providing leadership for the attack on Basra in 2003, and that's very clear from the Iraq inquiry. What the inquiry also shows is that Blair's leadership of the stabilisation was inadequate. I mean, I'd go as far to say as times that it was incompetent. But it's quite clear to me, and I saw this for myself when I wrote the Army's final operational lessons study of Iraq, that the Army itself could have moved faster. It could have been less bureaucratic, and it could have moved faster to bend itself out of shape. And again, the Iraq inquiry lays out that there were unacceptable delays in the procurement of protected patrol vehicles for both Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm afraid the same sentiment applies to Afghanistan. Although one thing I became aware of when I was writing the book is there were many officers in the army at the time who worked, for example, in army headquarters, who felt that Operation Entirety had itself so bent the army out of shape that it made it difficult for it to reconcentrate on war fighting. And certainly the army didn't go back to Cold War level of exercising after Afghanistan as quickly as the US Army did, for example. So there are swings and roundabouts, but Iraq and Afghanistan, there were times when the army could have moved faster and more decisively.
And as well as operations, you also cover important exercises and some operations that were planned and rehearsed but never actually conducted. Can you just tell us about one or two of those?
I mean, one thing about the exercises, and we did talk about Exercise Lionheart earlier, is the scale of the troops deployed on them produced lessons. So equipment and people and plans were being tested, and they were constantly being revised. So an example I talk about in there is the quiet revolution in logistics, because what these exercises and logistic exercises showed is that the ammunition and mines couldn't be outloaded quickly enough from the depots and the bunkers, and couldn't be moved quickly enough to where it was needed, particularly gun lines and engineer squadrons laying minefields. And that gave rise to redesigning the bunkers and procuring new equipment, particularly the drops lorry, which was then a fantastic success in Operation Granby and the Balkans. And when you've got this high level of exercising, you're constantly exercising the muscles, and you're learning lessons. I mean, this is why rugby teams train so much. They're constantly learning and refining. You asked about the operations that didn't happen. Two come to mind. The first one, which has been covered, was the planned SAS raid on Argentina during the Falklands War, where, of course, the reconnaissance party got in but was dropped in the wrong place. And so the ambitious plan to land on an Argentine airfield where they were thought to be Exocet missiles and kill all the Argentine servicemen there and destroy the missiles, that never happened. And I actually come to the conclusion that it's a good thing it never happened. And the reason it's a good thing, because it would have been seen as an outrage, not only in Argentina, but in Latin America as a whole, and could have shifted the balance against the UK in the United Nations in New York. That's not dissing, the considerable effort that was put into this by the SAS and also the RAF and the Royal Navy. But in the balance of things, mounting it, I think, would have been a military success, but a political mistake.
And you state very clearly you didn't want to turn it into an autobiography, but I wonder how it felt to be critically analysing major operations in which you played a part and which played a notable part in your life.
That's a really searching question which nobody's asked before. But it did make me think how lucky I'd been to serve in the army at that time, to travel so much, to Hong Kong. I spent a fair share of my time in UK, Germany, Northern Ireland. But I also trained in France, Portugal, Canada on the wonderful armoured warfare training centre on the Prairie, which sadly is no more. Visited the United States 10 times on army duty. I think, though, that writing it and unearthing documents enabled me to join up the dots in a way that I couldn't do before.
Why is it I get the sense there's at least another book in you, Ben? It's been really good talking to you. And The Rise and Fall of the British Army, 1975 to 2025, is out now. Brigadier Ben Barry, great to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Mike, there's something in it, isn't there? Joining the dots, as Ben describes it, zooming out and seeing the whole arc of stories that may have been told in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Ben earlier this week, actually. I was chatting to him about the book. I haven't seen it yet. It's only just come out, but I will look forward to getting hold of a copy and reading it because I think it's very, I'm sure it's the right sort of story to tell. And as we were chatting this week, it reminded me that, you can know things in the way that you feel as if they're going around in your head all the time. You don't really focus on them until you have to write it down. And so until you have to write an article or a book on something, you don't really know what you think about all of this stuff until you join the dots in your own head, which is exactly what Ben did, and that's what we were talking about. And it reminded me of what A.J.P. Taylor used to say, the very celebrated English historian, who was a great historian of European history for the last 400 years. And he was a very wicked, controversial, mischievous historian. And he once said, every time I feel ignorant about a subject, I'll write a book about it. Because by the time I've finished, I know what I'm talking about. And it is, those of us who write will recognise that. Yeah, if you don't know about anything, write a book.
You know what I do, Mike? I do a podcast about it. Thank you very much. It's great talking to you as ever. And thanks to all of our guests. Professor Michael Clarke and I will be back with another Sitrep next Thursday. But there is much more from my conversation with Ben Barry, including lessons from previously classified documents on an extra edition of the Sitrep podcast. It's online now at bfbs.com/Sitrep or wherever you get your podcasts. For now, though, from me, Kate Gerbeau, thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.